think he's in the building. I think he's just got a few things to wrap up. I appreciate everybody coming out this morning. The one thing I will ask you before we even get started is if you have a cell phone, go ahead and put it on silent so that we don't hear the ringing noises throughout this whole thing. We're going to try to move expeditiously through this and get things going. This is the Short-Term Rental Study Committee. My name is Terry Rogers, and I represent District 10, which is in the northeast part of the state. Have the pleasure of chairing this committee. It came as a result of H.R. 810, which just kind of wanted to take an overall look at the whole picture, sponsored by Chairman John Burns. Most of you guys know this, of course, what a study committee is and what it does. But for those who don't, basically we have no legislative power as far as trying to, let me go ahead and clarify that. We have no legislative power as far as trying to do a bill or a resolution or anything like that. It's not like your standard committee hearing. We're simply a fact-finding gathering where we're going to sit here. We're going to be like Switzerland. We're totally and completely neutral and open. We want to hear all of the information, and then what we'll do is we'll take that information, probably ask some questions, and then at the end of the thing, I think there's 3 meetings for this group. At the end of the 3rd meeting, we'll probably all get together and come up with a recommendation. We'll write it and turn it in to the entire House of Representatives. Doesn't mean that it's a recommendation for legislation or against legislation or anything like that. It's more of a resource. So let me just go ahead and be very clear about that. The way I look at it, and I've just sat down and Brian and I have talked. This is Brian Groom, and Brian is the policy analyst in this. The way I look at this, and Brian and I have sat and kind of talked through the whole thing, I'm seeing 3 questions, and they sort of stagger on top of each other. And I'm going to tell you guys the way I see it just a little bit. First one is, I think what we really need to do is to define what a short-term rental is. I think there's some questions out there, so if we can come up with a good definition of what a short-term rental is, that's a good thing. Based on that, then the second thing obviously is there any need for regulation whatsoever? So, if there's not, that's the end of it. If there is, then we'll go to the third thing, and that's, should that legislation be required? Does it need to be on the state level? Does it need to be on the local level? Or where do we go with it? So it's all sort of staggered. So this is the beginning of the process. Now that's my thoughts on it. At this point, what I'd like to do is start out the far end, and I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves and tell you where they're from and maybe kind of what they expect from the committee. So Chairman Taylor, you want to start with you?
You said the far end, not the far right, correct? Okay. Tom Taylor, represent District 79, which is Dunwoody, about half of Doraville, including where the old jam plant was, and a very tiny sliver of Chamblee, just up in the north end of DeKalb County. In my 3rd term, and I'm Chairman of Martok right now.
Anything that you'd like to see out of the thing?
I've got a lot of hoteliers in my district that have expressed some concerns, but I haven't heard from the other side yet. I've got Intercontinental Hotels Group and some other folks up there that have approached me over the past couple of weeks, but open mind here.
Great, thank you. Spencer Fry.
Hey, I'm Representative Spencer Fry. I represent Athens, House District 118. It's a great opportunity to be here. I appreciate all of y'all being here to educate us on what we need to maybe do, maybe not do. I think it's going to be a question of balancing our personal property rights with a level playing field and trying to see exactly where the line is going to be falling in between those 2 objectives. So thanks for having us out.
And on a personal note, if you'll note the smile on Representative Fry's face, he's still smiling from the South Carolina ball game. So go Dogs. I like that. Thank you, Spencer. Chairman Tankersley.
Good morning. I'm Representative Jan Tankersley. I represent House District 160, which is primarily most of Bullock County, although I share a little bit of it with a couple of other representatives, and the northern part of Bryan County. I'm chairman of Intergovernmental Coordination and glad to see so many of you here this morning. I'm keeping absolutely an open mind. I've had a chance to review some documents about short-term rentals, but I'm interested in hearing from both sides of the issue and I agree with our chairman. We'll just see what our recommendations may be, and they absolutely may not include legislation, but I'm sure that we'll hear a lot of good information from some of you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Brian, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I'm here to take notes and make sure everything gets organized and done properly.
And if you are here, and let me just go ahead and tell you this, and you're not signed up now and you want to, do we have a sign-up sheet for public comment?
We can get one.
We'll get a sign-up sheet for public comment. We may take some public comment at the end. And but if for the next meeting you have an interest in speaking or testifying before this committee, I would ask that you get with Brian and talk with him about that. Counselor, do you have anything down there that you want to say or introduce yourself?
I'm Sean Marie Story from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
Great. Thanks, Sean Marie. Chairman Dollar, welcome. Let's see, what are you, number 19? Why don't you introduce yourself, tell them what you represent, what you'd kind of like to see out of the committee.
Matt Dollar. I represent area 30 minutes north of here, East Cobb, Sandy Springs, and I'm excited to be on the committee and see what everybody has to say.
Great. Thanks. All right. Let's get started. I think we've got a good program today. Brian's done a great job of putting together people. We've kind of balanced this out in as far as like maybe trying to get some information all the way around. We're going to start with the Airbnb folks. Are y'all here today? Airbnb's not here. Or you are here. There you go. Okay. And it's Jillian, right? Jillian, yeah. You can go there or you can, whichever is easiest for you. This is Jillian Irvin with Airbnb.
My name is Jillian Irvin. I'm the Public Policy Director for Airbnb. Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning.
And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present here today and for reaching out to Airbnb on behalf of the state. Airbnb was founded in 2008. It is a trusted community marketplace for people to list and book accommodations through what is now called a process called home sharing. Home sharing connects travelers to unique local experiences at any price point. It allows working and middle-class property owners to turn what is typically one of their greatest expenses, their home, into a tool that helps them make ends meet. The vast majority of our hosts, over 80% of them, are renting their home in an area that is typically outside of the traditional hotel zone. So these are in the more rural, non-urban situations, a little bit farther from the central downtown areas. Most of our hosts are people who share their homes in order to pay their rent or their other bills. Airbnb guests generally help sustain the local economy, and they activate economic opportunities for the local neighborhoods in which they are staying. They're able to provide additional economic. They are able to participate in the smaller economies and the small businesses and the restaurants and the stores that are outside of the typical traditional tourist areas. As more and more people embrace innovation that enables them to use more efficiently the resources they already own, it is important to avoid unnecessarily hurdles to stunt this type of economy. Oh, I'm sorry, can you not hear me?
You're not on the mic, but you can hear you okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So we believe that smart, sensible regulations are both helpful and needed, mainly surrounding safety, insurance, and simplifying the tax collection process. With regards to safety, some examples of regulations that we've seen work well in other cities and states include requiring functional smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors in all host homes that are hosting on the platform, requiring fire extinguishers in the homes, and imposing reasonable accommodation limits, such as 2 adults per room or a certain number of caps for the number of individuals per night in the accommodation. And although we've had over 25 million guests throughout the world that have had safe experiences on the platform, I cannot deny that accidents do happen. And our hosts deserve peace of mind when they do. And so because of that, we also encourage you to regulate the insurance requirements behind these sorts of establishments as well. As of right now, Airbnb offers a host protection insurance program, which will protect claims up to $1 million per occurrence. So, if a guest is injured in a listing or elsewhere on the property during a stay, our host protection program will protect that host and their assets up to $1 million, and as well as their landlords under a commercial liability policy. And lastly, with regards to tax, this is something that is often misrepresented in the press. Do not believe everything you hear. We do, as a company, believe that our hosts are responsible for paying tax to the state. But the best way that we've seen for this to work is for us as a company to be responsible for actually collecting and remitting that sales tax. So this is the way that it's easiest for our hosts to do it, and it's the best way for us to guarantee that the state's actually getting the money that they deserve. The occupancy tax that we usually have will appear as a line item on the listing's public page, and so everyone is aware of what the tax rate is before agreeing to take the purchase. And it'll also appear in the host transaction history, so if there were something that needed to be audited at some later date, you'd be able to see kind of as a line item what the rate was. So in practice, we are currently collecting and remitting voluntarily in several states several cities throughout the country, and by an MOU agreement in Washington, D.C., Seattle, the state of North Carolina, and Rhode Island. In the Washington, D.C. area, we are paying the D.C. sales tax on hotels, which is about 14.5% of the listing, including a cleaning fee for reservations that are 90 nights or shorter. In North Carolina, guests who book Airbnb listings that are located in the state will pay the North Carolina sales tax, which is about 6.75% of the listing, and the state-imposed statewide 4.75% tax, and the local 2 to 2.5% tax, which varies by county. In Rhode Island, guests who book through Airbnb will pay the Rhode Island sales tax of 7% of the listing for nights for reservations that are 30 nights or less, and the local hotel tax of 1%, and the statewide hotel tax of 5%. However, rentals for the entire home or an entire apartment are excluded from this tax. It's only for people that are rooming out just one room. That are renting out just one room in their home, so that's a little bit of a difference there. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I've hit on my main 3 points, but of course, any additional questions you have, either today or at a later date, I would like to make myself available to answer those for you.
Great, thank you. Chairman Donald.
Hey, thank you for your presentation. At the beginning, where did you say that the majority of your rentals occur?
80% occur outside of the traditional hotel zone.
Okay, so like kind of rural areas or? So
they're able to access areas that, yes, either don't have a strong hotel presence in them, and neighborhoods that they probably wouldn't otherwise see. One of the great examples is people that want to move to a neighborhood and see what it's like to live there before they're actually putting a bid down in a house, and they're actually, if they haven't lived in that state before, they haven't lived in the city, they're able to then stay a week in a residential area that wouldn't have the same experience if they were in a hotel, for instance, and they wouldn't get that same experience if they were staying downtown, and really get to know what the kind of flavor of the community is. And that's what we think we are able to provide, that kind of a unique experience of staying in a place that traditionally you haven't been able to get a place unless you had a family member that was living there already.
Thank you.
Yes. Does Airbnb currently have a policy in place where you have a checklist to ensure that the person who lists with you does have smoke alarms, fire extinguisher?
So it's interesting because we are an international company, so we don't have a blanket policy throughout the entire world of what that looks like, and we are working on that. It's just some countries, some cities throughout the world have different kind of expectations. We just started a policy here in the States, for instance, that we're shipping out to all hosts that want them, working smoke detectors. And I'm not an expert on exactly what it is. It's a lithium battery. It's supposed to work up to 10 years. It's the top of the line thing to make sure exactly that. But it's one of those, it's a situation in which we're expecting and we require all of our hosts to be up to the safety standards of the area in which they live. But we're kind of working with state by state to make sure that that's actually written in the code regarding the short-term rentals.
May I ask one further
Sure.
question? So are you saying that it would be up to a local municipality or county government to have ordinances in place? And who would go inspect to make sure those things are in place?
So, I mean, and this is typically one of the interesting things about the platform service. So on our platform right now, you check off, you verify yourself that you have a smoke detector, et cetera. And we have a trust and safety team that works with you to make sure that everything that you have, that you're saying that you have, is up to par. But that is made aware to the guests before they agree to stay there. But part of the reason that the product works much like an Uber situation or a ride-sharing situation is that we rely on real-time accountability so that the guests are able to both rate the hosts and the hosts are able to rate the guests. But in that, the guests are always able to say at any point if they notice that there was not a fire extinguisher or if they did not have a smoke detector in the room that they were staying in. That is something that they would be able to report then back to the company, and the company would be either able to talk to our guests or to the host and say, we noticed that there was this issue. Guests said that they were concerned about the fact that there was not a working fire alarm in the house, and that we would be able to rectify the situation from that end.
Okay. Do we have any other?
Representative Fry.
Thank you. I've got a couple questions for you. So, do you have an idea of how many current listings you guys have in the state right now?
In the state, no, but I can get that number for you.
And along with that, I'd like to see what the dollar value is for those listings.
Okay.
And final follow-up question.
Sure.
How do we get an MOU where you guys remit taxes back to our municipalities?
So we have a very trusty tax team that I can put you in touch with and get that process started.
That'll be great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Real quickly, talk to me just a little bit about this insurance policy that you were talking about. Basically, what you're saying is you guys offer like maybe a $1 million umbrella policy. Is that sort of what it is?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. What percentage of your people probably take advantage of that? Do you have any idea?
Well, if you have most people, if they have an issue in the house, yes, of course, they're going to take care. They're going to ask for additional coverage. I don't know the percentage exactly of when this kicks in, and it is a newer policy. This started with the current language that we have in the beginning of 2015.
Okay, so we really don't have a track record on it yet.
Exactly. So we don't have any more than a year's worth of data.
Okay. Good. Anybody else? Anything? All right. We most certainly appreciate you coming. I think it's a new and innovative way to look at things, and we appreciate your testimony. Look forward to talking with you some more. Thank you. All right. Very good. So, Ashley Hodgins, is that right? Hi. Close enough. From HomeAway.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman and members, my name is Ashley Hajini. I am in Government Relations at HomeAway, and I appreciate the invitation and opportunity to discuss the short-term rental industry in HomeAway with you today. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background, since this discussion is still in its early stages, about what exactly we believe a short-term rental is. So traditionally, short-term rentals, also known as vacation rentals, are typically defined as a residential property that's rented for less than 30 days to a visitor. They're primarily offered by individuals, and while some short-term rentals are available for rent year-round, some are rented only during a season or on special occasions. Traditional short-term rentals are used for more than just vacations. They serve a broad variety of purposes, including hosting families that are remodeling their homes, business people that are in town for more than just a few days, and to accommodate groups or families that are needing extended medical-related stays. They also provide lodging for the creative arts industry by hosting those in town for music and film and digital media production, things of that nature. The traditional short-term rental traveler also varies from your average hotel traveler. Traditional short-term rental patrons are typically a family or a group of people visiting for longer periods of time. For instance, HomeAway's typical traveler is, the average length of stay is 5 days. The average size of the party is 3.7 adults and 1 child. And the average age of the party is 44 years old. And we're looking at an average cost per night at about $275 in that range. So it's obviously a little bit of a different market entirely. So a little bit about my company. HomeAway is the world's leading online marketplace for vacation rentals with over 1 million listings in 191 countries across the globe. Through HomeAway, property owners and managers list their homes for rent, which can provide travelers with many benefits not available in typical hotels. Vacation and short-term rentals are particularly popular with families and groups because they can get on average twice the space for half the cost of a hotel, as well as amenities such as a full kitchen and yard and patio, etc. HomeAway is an acquisitive company and was founded 11 years ago. Recognizing the strong demand for this type of travel, the company quickly grew to include such vacation rental brands as Vacation Rentals by Owner, or VRBO. Our portfolio is now comprised of dozens of other leading vacation rental websites, such as vacationrentals.com and bedandbreakfast.com, which is the most comprehensive global site for bed and breakfast properties. So the concept of renting one's vacation home is not new. HomeAway's oldest brand is actually 30 years old. And as the popularity of short-term rentals continue to grow, it's extremely important, we believe, that government find and employ effective ways to regulate the industry. Traditional short-term vacation rental industry has continued to grow exponentially over the past several years. It's an estimated $85 billion plus industry in the United States and Europe, the benefits of which are many. Short-term rentals can offer an affordable lodging option for traveling families and groups staying for a longer period of time, again, and they allow second homes to be used and maintained, and most importantly, they provide critical tax revenue to their communities and create a strong economic impact. In North Carolina, for example, traditional short-term rentals have generated $4.5 billion in total economic impact and $180 million in tax revenue. 46,000 jobs are supported directly and indirectly by the industry in that state. In Florida, short-term rentals have a $31.1 billion economic impact and over 322,000 jobs, which generate an incredible $12.6 billion in labor income annually. Economic impact studies have also shown that in small towns, such as St. Joseph, Michigan, for example, short-term rentals generate $24 million in economic activity and support 300 jobs annually, and at the larger level in cities such as New Orleans, Myrtle Beach, Austin, where I'm from, Galveston, the short-term rental industry supports thousands of local jobs and contributes hundreds of millions of dollars in economic impact. And I believe a lot of this is because there is such a strong demand by travelers to travel differently. People and families in particular are traveling for longer periods of time, and they're more interested in investing in a single community during their travels, meaning that when they visit, these folks truly want to get to know the community that they're staying in. So to meet the demand for these type of accommodations and for communities to benefit from vacation rental activity, governments are typically best served by creating regulation that doesn't discriminate between short-term rentals and long-term rentals. Based on years of experience and extensive research, HomeAway knows that the best and most effective traditional short-term rental regulations are those that are clear and simple to follow, so that property owners and managers can easily comply and pay their taxes. Cities such as Palm Desert and Nashville have implemented this type of fair and effective regulation, which allows property owners and managers to register and easily understand the rules and pay their taxes. And by so doing, those cities have experienced a significant increase in compliance. We strongly agree with the policy adopted by the United States Conference of Mayors, which states that onerous regulations in short-term rentals can drive the industry underground, thus evading local regulations and local hotel taxes, and fair regulations of short-term rentals ensures greater compliance and greater receipt of local hotel taxes. In closing, HomeAway has worked very hard to be a strong proponent of fair and effective regulations, and we're longtime supporters of tax collection and remittance within the industry. When reviewing regulatory best practices, we always start with the guidance that the U.S. Conference of Mayors provided. That concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, ma'am. So I guess what I'm hearing from both you and Airbnb is that you guys are open to the regulatory aspect as long as it's fair and everything, that you already have it in place. Do you know how many states or municipalities that you're already dealing with right now, as far as from a regulatory standpoint?
Quite a few. We operate in tens, hundreds of thousands of municipalities across the globe, so I couldn't give you an exact number.
Sure.
But in the United States, the issue has grown exponentially since the emergence of new innovative models such as Airbnb. So we're seeing it more and more often.
Okay. What about, I know Airbnb had said that they had offered, I was interested in the umbrella policy. Do you guys offer anything like that also?
Unlike Airbnb, HomeAway is not the merchant of record.
Okay.
We're simply an advertising venue. I like to think of us as the gigantic back of a newspaper. So we're actually not involved with the transaction that takes place between the owner and the traveler. A lot of times we don't even know if a transaction has taken place. So there's no way for us to actually be collecting those taxes and remitting them as a platform. Our owners do that.
Okay. Let me just go ahead and interject this while I think about it, because my mind is shot this morning already. If you are interested in making comments, there is a sign-up sheet on the podium. Is that right, Brian? So, you know, if you're interested in the public comment section at the end of this thing, please sign up and we'll get to you. In the meantime, Chairman Taylor?
I guess this is more of a question for Airbnb, just because I didn't know your business plan. How do y'all assess risk, you know, from the price point? I guess basically, if I'm renting to a retired couple, that's one thing. If I'm renting to a fraternity over a football weekend, that's a different thing.
Sure. Sure.
You would hope. But do y'all assess that, or is there? I guess when I go into a hotel, I put a deposit down on my credit card and do that. I just don't know the normal practice for these rooms.
I think that would be a better question for Airbnb, since they are the merchant of record. Us as a platform, we're not involved in any sort of risk assessment. The owner may, and they're certainly at liberty to say adults only, or certain, you know,
limit
the occupancy,
okay.
so on and so forth. And we encourage them to do so based on their property and their needs.
Anybody else? Representative Fry, anything? Chairman Tankersley? We're moving really fast. Matt, anything? One of the things I would ask is that if you guys have copies of your presentation, if you could get the presentations to us for everybody that's testifying today, that would be great. If you could get them to Brian, he'll distribute those. You guys obviously have a lot of information. We're going through it fairly fast. So, no other questions of the committee? Thank you, ma'am. You flying from Austin?
I did.
God's country.
So is this, indeed.
Yeah, it is. All right. Let's see. The Georgia Hotel and Lodging Association. Jim? You want to talk to us this morning? You guys don't have an interest in this, do you? Maybe a little bit?
We have some thoughts.
Good. Good.
Although I am encouraged by some of the things I've heard already today. But good morning, Chairman Rogers, Study Committee. I'm Jim Sprouse, Executive Director of the Georgia Hotel and Lodging Association. GHLA is the voice of the Georgia lodging industry. We have a long history in this state. Our association represents large and small branded properties and independent-owned family businesses across Georgia. There are approximately 1,982, I got new numbers this morning, that in Georgia, in the overall hospitality market, employs over 400,000 Georgians, and within the lodging market, about 43,000. GHLA appreciates the opportunity to testify, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The economic impact of the Georgia lodging community is critical to our state's tourism economy. I shared with you the number of people working in tourism. It's huge. It's one of the largest industries in the state. Recently, the governor announced that the economic impact of tourism was over $50 billion. Actually, I believe it was closer to $54 billion. And based on data from HNLA, now this is a little older data, but $1.6 billion in tax revenue for state and local governments and $1.2 billion in employee wages. And that's just from the lodging component alone. Hotel owners and hotel professionals provide jobs in local communities throughout Georgia, and our leaders participate in local charities, support schools, and do much more for the communities for which they neither look for or get recognition very often. They do habitat builds, linen drives, support local food banks, police departments, refurbish firehouses, and even landscaping in local parks. I did that one myself, including a house build, just to let you know that we're good community partners wherever the hotels are located. Hotels pay local and state taxes, including the newly created state hotel motel fee, which in its first month of operation collected $15 million, so a significant number there, and that was just July alone. It's an established industry that embraces competitions, believes in innovation, and creates a safe and compliant experience for our guests. But we're looking for a level playing field that is fair and compliant. Hotels operate in a regulatory framework, whether the business is a large brand, a small family-owned business, or a new market participant. We submit that what is ultimately best for everyone is that everyone play by the rules and operate under regulations, and that all market participants should take appropriate measures to comply with Georgia laws and regulations. As an industry, our mission is to provide quality and safe service to our guests, impress our guests with a positive visitor experience, and share our southern hospitality. We want to ensure that guests return to Georgia and support local communities throughout the state and spend their travel dollars on our main streets throughout the state. Georgia hotels, as responsible corporate citizens, remit excise tax, sales tax, federal income tax, state income tax, special purpose local option sales tax, real property taxes, and the state hotel motel fee. Our industry is successful because we embrace a highly competitive business model where everyone plays by the same rules. And that's what we're here to discuss today. In addition to state regulations, our branded hotels have very strict guidelines that are established to ensure the integrity of the guest experience. And those requirements apply to the size of the property no matter how large or small. And one good example that I think you should consider in this discussion is a bed and breakfast. It's a small lodging business that's subject to fair and reasonable regulation now. Very important to the market in Georgia. Georgia law requires that a bed and breakfast operator must maintain a business license, operate under local zoning laws, and remit the appropriate state and local sales taxes. Bed and breakfast operators are competing in the same market space as the short-term rental companies. However, they are competing at a disadvantage now because they are subject to a higher operating cost because of the regulations. And I'd invite you to speak. I noticed Holly came in. She represents the Innkeepers Association, so I hope she signs up for comment. Sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I think you'd like to hear her story. I was also asked to provide information on what it takes to open a hotel in Georgia, and I just wanted to share some of the concepts there. But to do business in Georgia as a hotel, you must have licensing established, have a business license, corporate registration, resident agent, attorney, register as an innkeeper, trade name registration, liquor license if you're serving that. All employees are I-9 or E-Verify, zoning, certificate of occupancy, housing codes, noise regulations, trash collections, sustainability regulations, zoning, parking regulations, taxation, collect and pay all tax required, health and safety, fire marshal inspection, health inspection, liability insurance, ADA, insurance, general liability, public liability, workers' comp, umbrella policies. These new market participants are under no such obligations for these requirements. As you do your work and gather data, I hope that you'll explore how they could remit their fair share of taxes and comply with common sense safety, security, health, and fire standards while operating in Georgia. Competition is the hallmark of our industry. We welcome it. It makes us better and stronger. Competition drives more jobs, more growth, innovations, and new models on how to better serve our guests. It's a good time to be in the hotel business, and the fact that we're having this discussion really illustrates that because more people are trying to get into it. It's also a perfect time for you to look at how regulations could apply. As this committee progresses, our association is happy to gather and provide additional information for your consideration. And we all want Georgia to be a safe destination and a preferred destination for our guests. But I thank you for the opportunity to speak. Happy to answer questions as I can.
Questions? You guys awake? Okay.
I didn't mean to put you to sleep.
No. Representative Fry woke up. So
one of my really, really good friends in Athens is a hotel owner.
Okay.
But he's also an extreme advocate for personal property rights.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a suggestion on where we could lay that balancing line in between all the regulations that you stated that the hoteliers have to comply with versus an individual that might just want to rent their home out for a Georgia football game weekend? It's the only property they own, and it doesn't happen but maybe 6 weekends a year. Like, is there y'all have something in your head already for that, or is this what we're all here doing, trying to figure out?
I think this is going to require further discussion, but the model you just outlined is very different from someone who's making this a continual business. So
Absolutely.
There's a high occupancy, a high number of nights throughout the year, problems with parking and noise, and I think you might get some more information as you talk to our representative from Savannah, because I've dealt with this with a local ordinance. I believe they're up next.
Sure.
On that, but I do see a difference with the way you just outlined that. And it's like, somebody rents out a room for a kid just out of school. They're there for a long term. That's a little different scenario from setting it up as a business and basically operating as an illegal hotel.
Right. So so you do have a delineation between those two operation.
Yeah, there are models that are being developed across the country, and as you are ready for that, I can bring in some people and some examples for that.
Okay.
So that you can choose from some practices and select the best ones that fit Georgia.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chairman Tankersley.
So just to go back and clarify, we heard earlier a definition for short-term rental housing, that it's typically a dwelling unit that's rented for a period of less 30 days, 30 consecutive days or less. So there's different. We have the hotels, and then we have just those that Spencer mentioned that may rent out just for 6 days out of the year. Or in Augusta, when they have the golf tournament, they rent it out for a couple of weeks, and that's the only time they rent their home. So we've got different situations that are going to require a different set of rules, it seems to me.
I think you're right. As we explore those, you'll be able to define those different models. And really, to me, the distinction is if you're entering this as a ongoing active business, that makes a difference.
That's the key.
And what we're seeing across the country is we're seeing investors actually buy homes and turn them into rentals. They don't live in the homes, but they're renting it out through these mechanisms. And I think that's part of the real problem you want to take a look at.
Yeah, I think that's the key. They do turn it becomes a business.
Correct.
With little regulation. Although I do think that you have a number of local ordinances that do address noise and parking. Some of those can be controlled on the local level. So
yes.
it does boil down to tailoring each situation.
Correct.
In different parts of the state.
Now my 2 cents worth, for whatever it's worth, is I think you might want to consider giving the locals some support at the state level, provide that guidance or something, so that there's not a different ordinance in every different city across the state.
So, excuse me.
Go ahead.
So what you're saying is you don't want to have a broad brush of ordinances all across the state. You'd like to see some sort of guide model.
I think that would be a good solution, but that'll develop as your study committee meets.
Right.
Like I say, I'm happy to bring in additional resources as you're ready for them.
Yeah, if you would work with Brian on that, and Brian, get with them. Thank you.
Happy to.
Okay. Representative Fry?
Thank you. Do you know if there are any other states that regulate this at the state level yet in the nation, or are we just seeing the regulation at the local municipal level?
I'd have to check. I know there's a lot of activity in states across the country to develop that state model. I'm not sure where they are in the process. I know New York City has an ordinance in place, but I mean that's just at the city level.
Right. Just wondering if there's example of a state that already has done this and seeing their success or failure rate at it, just so we're not stepping into it first.
I'd be happy to research that for you.
Sure. Thank you.
Anybody else from the committee standpoint? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Once again, I'm going to ask if you do want to have public comments at the end. It looks like we're going to have plenty of time, but if you would just sign up right here, that would be great. And one of the models that we did want to bring into this first meeting was the Savannah model. I think that they've gone ahead and taken a proactive approach on that, and I appreciate you guys coming. So Bridget and Jennifer, if you guys would just go from there, we'll do that. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Rogers and study committee members. My name is Bridget Liddy. I'm the Director of Tourism Management and Ambassadorship with the City of Savannah, and I'm here with Jennifer Herman from our Assistant City Attorney's Office. It is our honor and privilege on behalf of the City of Savannah to speak with you regarding the creation and effects of Savannah's short-term vacation rental regulations. As you know, Savannah is a popular destination. Tourism represents the second largest industry in Savannah. Last year, 13.4 million visitors came to our area, representing 7.3 million overnight visitors, staying an average of 2.4 nights. In 2014, direct spending by visitors contributed to $2.5 billion to our local economy, while the hotel-motel tax collections were $16.6 million, up 14.3 from 2013. As a growing destination, Savannah attracts a wide array of visitors. Many prefer a residential, home-like setting for their stay. This has resulted in vacation rentals becoming a popular form of lodging accommodation. Last week, when reviewing the listings for Savannah on Airbnb, approximately 568 properties were listed, 79% as entire dwelling units, 20% as a room, and less than 1% as a shared room. Yet this conversation is not about Airbnb or HomeAway. It is about the shared economy, an internet-based system built around the sharing of human and physical resources using multiple platforms. All trends indicate over the next decade this will continue to grow. In 2014, stakeholders operating vacation rentals approached the City of Savannah, demanding equity within the industry. They felt it was unfair they had to comply with local and state regulations while other entities participating in the shared economy didn't have to. During discussions with the community, it became apparent vacation rentals represented a multifaceted issue, ranging from the need to protect residents' quality of life to also including renter safety. The city responded by developing a short-term vacation rental text amendment as well as a zoning or a regulation for the use. As you all mentioned earlier, Chairman Rogers, coming up with a definition for short-term vacation rentals, we were scratching our heads. We were saying, what do we do? So we went ahead and crafted a definition. And basically, in looking at it, it had to do with looking at our code and saying what is similar to a vacation rental. And we went with the in definition because it had to do with the similar type of use, the entire building unit being used. We came up with the definition. It is defined as an accommodation for transient guests where in exchange for compensation, a residential dwelling is rented for lodging for no more than 30 consecutive days. Because the rental is an entire dwelling unit as opposed to a bedroom, an owner or manager does not have to reside within the premises. For the purposes of our definition, a residential dwelling unit includes all housing types. It does not include group living facilities or other lodging accommodations. A transient guest is a person who resides at a place other than their usual residence for no more than 30 days in exchange for compensation. The new use is permitted in commercial and mixed-use zoning districts where the in use was permitted. We also developed a provision to protect the residents' quality of life in a specific district or a specific area of the city where there were a high number of residents who lived there full-time who were maybe a little concerned about the use of short-term vacation rentals. So we require them to go through our Zoning Board of Appeals to allow for residents to express whether or not they support or oppose a petition for vacation rental in their specific districts. And that's just for the Victorian Neighborhood District. So moving on with our discussions, residents still had a lot of issues with their experiences with short-term vacation rentals. Occupancy requirements, homes being used as party venues, noise, parking, and litter. And in your packets that you have, there's a tab in there in section 4 which kind of outlines some of the concerns from residents. I'm going to go ahead and share with you 2 examples of some of the comments that we received during our public feedback, just to give you an image as to what some of the situations we were dealing with in Savannah. So this is from a woman who lives in the historic district. One short-term rental next door to me is a particular concern, as it is a small house that is only supposed to accommodate 4, but often it is full of as many as 10 people. This is scary to me, having a 5-year-old child who would like to play in our courtyard, but often can't, as there is loud partying going on next door with inappropriate language. And the aspect of a transient person coming and going each night is terrifying as a mother. One day, we were leaving for school when we walked out of our home to get in a car, and a man was sitting on the porch next door. He looked at me and said, "Your daughter sure is pretty. What time does she get home from school?" In addition to that, she said, we have a giant window that overlooks the courtyard next door. It does provide some entertainment, some not so wonderful sights. Young ladies doing drugs and then passing out. Another resident shared this comment. We have multiple issues with short-termers involving loud parties, parking, trash, and urinating in public. I had one individual who urinated in my tree lawn at 7 p.m. This was still daytime, as we sat on our porch. I asked him to stop, and he and his friends, who were staying at the rental, started cursing at me and wanted to fight. So these are just some of the comments that we as a municipality were receiving from some of the residents where they were being impacted by the vacation rentals. Many of these issues we were able to address in our zoning code when we did the text amendment. Specifically with the occupancy, to manage those issues, we limited to 2 adults per bedroom, plus 2 adults for the entire dwelling unit. With this standard in place, the bedroom size and the number of beds limit the number of people who can stay in that room. The limited availability of parking was another concern. Unfortunately, parking, if you've ever been to downtown Savannah, has always been an issue. And it was not solely created by this particular use becoming popular. Rather, it's due to the popularity of the city and more users coming into the downtown. Furthermore, with a vacation rental, the rentals were used solely on the weekends in many cases, so that frees up parking during the week. What we did do is look at the zoning code and require that if a property had 3 or more bedrooms, requiring additional parking once they reached that threshold. A final condition of the zoning amendment prohibited any kind of exterior modifications to the property, like signage. The residents didn't want to have a huge sign out in front of a property because it detracted from the residential quality of life. But even with all these different zoning requirements in place, the residents were not satisfied. City officials responded specifically by recrafting a short-term vacation rental ordinance. And I have Jen Herman here because she was kind of one of the key persons in authoring the ordinance. But the purpose of the ordinance is to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare of individuals and the community at large, to monitor and provide reasonable means for citizens to mitigate impacts created by occupancy of short-term vacation rental units, and to implement rationally based, reasonably tailored regulations to protect the integrity of the city's neighborhoods. The ordinance also addressed several issues raised by residents during the public meetings. First and foremost, it required that each short-term vacation rental secure a certificate. Certification is obtained by completing an application to include proof of ownership, proof of insurance, and a business acceptance form. And in your packet in section 2, there's actually a copy of that application packet. In crafting the regulations, the city was presented with an obstacle pertaining to a portion of state code that prohibited local government from performing inspections of residential rental properties. We were faced with serious concerns. How could a property initially inspected as a residential unit be used for commercial purposes without an inspection? How could officials ensure short-term vacation rentals were safe for visitors? The solution that we came up with was to shift the responsibility to the property owner. Building officials and the local fire marshal developed a code compliance form outlining recommended minimum safety guidelines for short-term vacation rentals. For example, making sure there's a primary exit, emergency escape, rescue openings, smoke alarms, and fire extinguishers. The form also recommends a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing professional inspect the building systems to make sure that they are all in good working order. An additional feature of the regulation requires the owner to designate an individual to handle any problems with the short-term vacation rental property and monitor compliance with the ordinance. This agent must be able to appear on the premises of the dwelling unit within 2 hours of receiving a phone call from the City of Savannah. For example, if it's late night and there's a party going on, the police get called, the police have access to the rental agent phone number, they go ahead and call them. Enforcement was also being addressed with the new regulation. Any violation of the zoning, building, health, or safety code violations or code resulted in fines ranging from $500 to $1,000. If a property owner accumulates 3 code violations for a specific property within a 12-month period, their certificate gets revoked for a period of 1 year. To assist with enforcement efforts, the ordinance also requires the assigned certificate number for that short-term vacation rental get used in all advertising, print and internet-based advertising. The ordinance also requires the owner obtain a City of Savannah annual business tax certificate and remit state and local sales taxes. The application fee is $150 and the annual renewal fee is $50. These fees are used to offset costs in managing the program. And within your first section of the packet is a copy of the ordinance as well as the zoning regulation. So let's talk about implementation. How did it go? Well, we kicked off implementation in January of this year. To date, the City of Savannah has received 410 short-term vacation rental applications on file. Of those, 82%, or 339, have been approved to operate as short-term vacation rentals. The application process permits the city to obtain data on the use. For example, short-term vacation rentals in downtown Savannah market an additional 654 total bedrooms in the overall inventory. That is on top of the 5,000 hotel rooms that are in the historic district. Approximately 71% offer 1 or 2 bedrooms, while the remaining nearly 30% offer 3 or more bedrooms. It is safe to presume, based on these statistics, that approximately 75% of the total units offer accommodation for double occupancy or more. And additional information is found in Section 3 of the report that you have for the data. Since the implementation of the ordinance, there have been approximately 330 calls for service, 295 for police, 30 for EMS, and 5 for fire. Calls range from property damage to theft. The number of noise complaints have actually gone down since the previous year. Other challenges exist for property owners within Savannah who are not zoned in districts permitting short-term vacation rentals or the rental of 1 bedroom. We had a petition that was created on change.org, I'm sure many of you all are familiar with that website, requesting the city declare a 1-year moratorium on the enforcement of alleged zoning violations related to the short-term vacation rentals in residential districts where they are currently not permitted. To date, 270 persons have signed that petition, yet the City of Savannah stands by the ordinance that we created in making sure that the residents' quality of life is protected, as well as providing equity within the industry. Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Jen?
I mean, I think Bridget's discussion highlights that this is really very much a unique local issue. Our experience has been that we've had to focus on a landmark historic district that is 1 square mile that proliferates with these types of uses. And that's really not similar to other jurisdictions. I don't think that you can create or paint an across-the-board rule that would apply. We worked very carefully with the locals to come up with, and frankly, it's a zoning issue, which is a municipal is reserved for us anyway, and that was how we were able to get at it. So we're happy to take any questions, but ours was a very long and collaborative process where we considered, everything that you're hearing today over the course, the better part of a year, to arrive at the ordinance that we have. And while I'm not going to stand here and say that it's perfect, it's certainly a good start and a good example of how it can be controlled. I'll acknowledge the hotel industry's comments. Having said that, though, I don't know that there's necessarily parity in all respects between a hotel and someone, for example, the Athens example, or someone in the downtown area who wants to rent it, 1 or 2 months a year, non-consecutive, of course, and live there. They are paying taxes now in Savannah. They are subject to regulation, and I think we've got a pretty good handle on what's happening. So with that, whatever questions you may have, we're happy to answer.
So I think it'd probably be fair to say that it's an ongoing process for you guys. You're continuing to monitor, you're continuing to look at it, and to say. The most amazing thing to me out of your presentation is the fact that you said that you guys had a problem with partying in Savannah. I've never had a problem there.
Right. It shocked us all, really.
Yeah, really. Chairman Dollar?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here, if I can find them. Take me through the timeline again. When did y'all start to look at this? How long was the ordinance process, and then when you had to revisit it, and then obviously I guess it was implemented at the beginning of this year.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the way it transpired is in 2013, towards the fourth quarter, the local industry, who were those individuals who were maintaining and operating short-term vacation rentals, following all the rules of the road, approached the local planning commission requesting that a definition needed to be developed for short-term vacation rentals. In the first quarter of 2014, we had a public meeting with the officials that were coming in to talk with us, to share their ideas. And what happened was we had a couple residents show up. And that was kind of a sidebar. We weren't expecting that at all. And that's where all these issues started to come out. So from the first quarter of 2014, we set up a small working committee and developed the zoning text amendment draft language, as well as crafting the ordinance. And I would say by June, we were presenting the information to our city council. And in October, it went through the local planning commission, and then it was presented to mayor and council in November. So it was about a full year process that we went through. And I will say, in working in local government, there are a lot of issues that we come in contact with that have to do with quality of life and balancing business interests. And this was definitely one of the most complex issues that I have ever dealt with in trying to come up with some type of compromise.
That and our alcohol ordinance, but
go figure.
It seems like we helped you guys out with the alcohol ordinance for New Year's Eve and St. Patrick's Day. I'm sorry, yes.
I want to emphasize, not only did we have a stakeholder-involved process, we also had at least 2 public meetings that were open, and we had significant attendance. We went through probably, I might be exaggerating, but 10 or 15 drafts of this ordinance, and what I looked at when I started writing it was what other municipalities were doing and pieced together, using those forms as go-bys, what would work for Savannah. So what might work in some town in California didn't always fit with the culture or the configuration of the city. And that's how the actual ordinance came to be.
There was one example somewhere in New England where we were looking at it, and one of the requirements for the ordinance was that everybody staying at the property had to have the same last name. It's like, I understand family, but that's just something that is so extreme that we can't put into our document. And I will say, in doing the research on all the different ordinances, there was really nothing in the state of Georgia, and we had to go outside of the state and really look at that state code and see what would stick and what wouldn't stick.
That's the state code issue. Our former city attorney was of the opinion that inspections weren't permitted. The state code disallows registration, with 2 exceptions, foreclosures and one other. So we were very conscious of that prohibition and trying to figure out how to acknowledge what's sort of really a twilight zone issue. I mean, it's not completely residential, it's not completely commercial, it's in the middle, like so many of these other examples in the sharing economy. I don't concede it's necessarily similar to Uber or Lyft or those things, because number one, your driver's license is a privilege. Driving across the state doesn't change. So I wouldn't go all the way with an analogy there, but it's certainly in terms of this quasi-commercial private, it's in the middle there, and that's really where we struggle to figure out what to do with it.
Chairman Dollar, I think you've got a couple follow-up questions.
Yes. Can you touch back on that as far as the state code and how y'all approach that?
So there were really two provisions in the state code we looked at. In Title 48, it speaks to collection of motel tax, and it's the language, in my opinion, was broad enough to pertain to an innkeeper or anybody who offered or furnished room, lodging for accommodations for value. So we had the tax piece in line. What we needed then to do was to determine whether or not those people were subject to a business tax certificate. We don't have a business license. It's a business tax certificate in Savannah. And it was our belief that they would and that they should be paying hotel motel tax. The second state law was one that prohibits registration of residences. And I think it's Title 44, somewhere in there. So we were concerned that by creating a scheme where you had a residence that was really the subject of some private transactions, arguably, we were concerned about running afoul of that registration requirement. Now, if that registration requirement were in place, things might be different. But I think that we've navigated those waters with our ordinance.
Okay. Follow up, Chairman.
Sure.
Can you explain to me how are you collecting the taxes?
Oh, for remittance of the hotel motel tax?
Yes.
So it's just like a hotel, it's just like an inn. They have to complete the same monthly form and submit it to the city of Savannah. One thing that we have done is we've created a code. So when an individual goes into our revenue department for a business tax certificate, they are given that code as an operator of a short-term vacation rental. From that code, they go ahead and remit the hotel motel tax, and we can pull data to show how much they are actually remitting as far as the short-term vacation rental industry based on that code when they come in. But they're treated just like all hotels and inns.
Okay, and one more. Can you speak more to this the rental agent component?
Sure. One of the concerns that we heard very loudly and clearly from our downtown residents in particular, and that's a mixed-use neighborhood. For instance, if you're all familiar with Ardsley Park, it's an R6. I think we've disallowed.
Could you kind of define? You guys keep talking about the historic district. Could you kind of define? Like, take me from Bay Street.
So you're going to go Bay Street all the way up to the middle of Forsyth Park.
Right.
And it's basically Boundary Street or MLK to East Broad.
Okay.
That's the core area that we're looking at. When I mentioned the Victorian neighborhood district,
right,
it would be Gwinnett Street to about 37th Street.
Okay. And there's and what is the prohibition, or is there a prohibition, or what are the limits set within that boundary?
So within those boundaries, it has to be located in zoning districts that is mixed use. Pretty much all of downtown is a mixed use district. When you cross that line and go into the Victorian Neighborhood Association, you have mixed use pockets, but you also have residential areas designated. So for those residential areas that are designated, that's where we have the Zoning Board of Appeals conditional approval for those individuals who want to operate in those districts as a vacation rental.
Were there already restrictions in place in that Victorian area there as far as building permits and conditions and things of that nature? Did you already have something to go off there?
We were primarily working off of the inn definition in the land use code,
Great.
Which included both districts.
And
thank you.
And so that's the only area where they had to go through the zoning process. Okay, interesting.
Well, when they actually, with the application process,
yeah,
there is a business acceptance form which I mentioned. That business acceptance form goes directly to our zoning department. They review the location, the PIN number, to ensure it's in the appropriate zoning district. If it's not, it gets kicked back to us, and they could either pursue the Zoning Board of Appeals or go ahead and petition the Metropolitan Planning Commission for a zoning text amendment. To date, none of the petitions that have come through to do that have been successful.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think I got you a little off topic there. I was
the agent.
Yeah, the rental agent.
In response to the residents' complaints about sort of absentee landlords, for lack of a better term, one of the concepts that we came up with, and again, this is all in collaboration with the industry and the Downtown Neighborhood Association, was to have someone be designated as available to address immediate problems. We were concerned about residency requirements, so what we said was, fine, you pick someone, we need a phone number, they have to be available, and they have to be here within 2 hours. one of the things we acknowledge in the ordinance is we don't expect that person to come and physically break up fights or subject themselves to violent conduct, but that seemed to satisfy our owners, that, you know, that feeling that there was someone that could be available. So that person has to be identified in the application process, and, you know, the owner's free to change that, and the owner can be that person if they want. We don't really take a position on that. We just want someone that we can contact.
So
you know,
that
2 in the morning.
ultimate responsibility. Okay.
Yeah, and they also are designated to accept service.
And I'm assuming that more often than not, most of the time, that's the owner who is serving in that.
You know, it's about a 50-50 split. The majority of them are managed by entity like local companies, or they're independent. I think 40% of the share in Savannah is Airbnb or HomeAway. The rest of them are owned by local companies.
Thank you. Chairman Tankersley.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to commend you on the development of such a comprehensive plan to address your specific issues. It's really tailored for Savannah. One thing I wanted you to touch on just briefly, because that was a lot of information at one time, but no, that's great, and I appreciate the packet you put together. But talk a little bit more about the certificate, and you said something about requiring that to be in the ad.
Part of our process requires an individual fill out an application. Once they have completed the application, they are officially certified as a short-term vacation rental. One of the requirements that we have in place is that any type of advertising for that vacation rental needs to include that certification number. It's our way of ensuring that that property being advertised online, whatever kind of website it's on, is actually a legitimate vacation rental per the City of Savannah standards.
Now, this certificate number that's assigned, is this the certificate that the property owner uses to do the self-inspection? Yeah,
so as part of the application, there's the code compliance form,
the code
and so
compliance.
they complete that as part of the application process.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Representative Fry.
I don't know if anybody remembers, but that rental registration stuff originated from Athens. And I would really just like to get some clarification on how y'all match the ordinance with the state law as far as the rental registration requirements. Do you have any details on that? Or we can follow up with that later.
I'm not sure that I'm understanding what you're asking in terms of, I mean, to help me.
So registering a rental property, the inspections would be not legal at a state level. Registering the actual home as a rental, I don't believe is considered legal. How can you, are you identifying, I mean, how are you meshing the two is what I'm...
The piece I didn't address is there's a 30-day provision there. In other words, so if it's in excess of 30 days, a rental unit, no registration, no
Gotcha.
restriction.
It's the short-term
Because
definition.
we're under that 30-day window.
Okay.
It's a different analysis.
Thank you.
Chairman Taylor.
You guys passed this ordinance, and when it went through the 12-month or so process, what kind of pushback did you get from like your local chamber, the hoteliers? Just kind of curious as to how that went.
They were with us through this whole process. In fact, at the end, the DNA and our TLC organization submitted a joint letter in support of our ordinance. So I think that because they were at the table throughout, the product that we ultimately produced was something that everyone had a voice in. And look, not everybody's happy about every provision in it, which, you know, to any of the lawyers in the crowd, it's like a mediation. You know, everybody sort of walks away a little bit unhappy, and that means it's a success. We're sort of there. But, you know, Bridget was really more boots on the ground, too. So I'll defer.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of going and meeting with people individually, both residents and members of the industry, explaining what the situation was, what we were trying to do to ensure that we had everybody on board prior to going in front of mayor and council with the package that we had. And, you know, like Jen said, it's all about building consensus on a particular issue. Not everybody won with the things that they wanted, but we were able to have something that everybody agreed to at the end of the road.
if I can follow up with a couple. Do you audit any of these, like on a periodic basis, the tax collection?
So the tax collection is actually handled by the Revenue Department, and they are the ones who do audits based on what they're seeing from returns.
Based on that, also for the members of the committee, we will have someone from the Department of Revenue at the next meeting. Gotcha. So, any other questions from the committee? Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you. And if you need any additional information, I
Well,
think Bridget provided.
Yeah, our contact information is in the back of the
Great. We appreciate the proactive approach that you've taken on the thing, and most certainly Savannah is so important to the state. Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Brian, we have a sign-up sheet. Okay, we're going to go to the public comment sort of thing right now and see. I don't know, what do we got? A couple people signed up to talk, and we'll just kind of go with the flow a little bit as far as time goes. But Jim Renner from St. Simon's. Good morning. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not representing any group here. I'm just a resident of St. Simon's Island, and I'm the guy who lives next door to all these. And I had many things that I wanted to communicate, but I think everybody has done a pretty good job of communicating most of the concerns that we, as residents of the neighborhoods where these short-term rentals take place, that most of the comments about reasonable regulation seem appropriate. So I guess I'm left wondering, what do I want to communicate to the committee? And one thing I would say is that one of the things we've heard is that not all short-term rentals are created equal. There's a big difference between the people that move in and they're at the beach for a week and a wedding party. Wedding parties cause all the problems. I can tell you that right now. It's not even Georgia, Florida weekend. It's wedding parties. And it's nice to think that we're all reasonable people, and my neighbor across the street who owns that house, that she would be a good landlord. If she was, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you. And, you know, it's a very different situation to hear about some of the things that people are talking about the shared economy and the benefits, but it also has a downside too. And I think that if there's any movement at the state to bring some consistency and clarity to this issue, we do need to take into consideration a couple things. One would be some local governments are extremely unresponsive to addressing neighborhood concerns. And I can tell you, if the house across from me, which has 4 bedrooms and is 2,000 square feet, is rented to 18 people for one night, which it is, and then they're turning it over the next day, there is nothing I can do about it. Nothing. There's nothing in the zoning ordinance because they consider that an accessory use of the property. And we're zoned in R6 neighborhoods, which is 4 stable single-family residential neighborhoods. And an accessory use to me would not seem to be an absentee landlord who owns 4 properties, doesn't live in any of them, and rents them full-time throughout the year. That seems to me the primary use of the property, and I think the Burton v. Glenn Georgia Supreme Court decision clearly indicates that's the primary use of a property, inappropriate for our zoning. Unfortunately, we have a county government that refuses to set any guidelines for renters. Really, the house across the street, it could be rented to 100 people. There's nothing to prevent that. Fire marshals won't inspect private properties. I can call the cops if there's noise, and that's all I got. That's it. So when they show up with 18 people Or maybe sometimes it's 12, or maybe sometimes it's 2, and they're nice, and I like them. But sometime during the year, they're going to show up with 18 people, and a motorhome, and a boat, and a trailer, and 10 cars, because there happens to be a vacant lot next door. There is nothing that I can do about this, because you can't call the cops. What are the cops going to do? You can't. I can't call the rental agency because, I hate to say it, but a lot of rental property managers are very, very unresponsive, and all they care about is getting the income, not addressing neighbor concerns. So the unlevel playing field that exists for the residents is that the rental management companies and the owners get all the income. The state and the county may get tax income, and the residents get the noise and the traffic and the creepy people and the disruption and a general degradation in the neighborhood. I know Representative Rogers, you saw that white paper I sent you for the National Association of Realtors. I think they said it best. Whatever impacts happen in our neighborhood that we talk about, noise, trash, disruptive behavior, that's the obvious stuff, but the less obvious is just the destruction of the character of our neighborhood. St. Simons is a great place. Maybe the inevitable evolution of a beach town is that we're going to give it to other people. We've already kicked out all the low-wage earners. You can't live on St. Simons Island and be a busboy or a waiter or a yard guy anymore. You have to be in Brunswick. Soon you're going to have to be in Brantley County. So we may cede the island to visitors, but we have to do that recognizing that means for those of us who are left in the transition period, all these people who come to visit the island, they bring money, and that's good, but they don't coach Little League, and they don't get a library card, and they don't look in on my 100-year-old neighbor down the street. All they do is walk past her house 5 times a day and peer over her hedge. And so I guess I'm asking for the state, originally I thought, well, just don't do anything that's going to make it difficult for a municipality to regulate it. Let's leave that on the table. But actually now, hearing all these comments, there's a lot of really good stuff that's been happening. If there's anything that can be done at the state level to provide some clarity and consistency that would put my local municipality, Glynn County, in a position where they would have a stronger opportunity to pass some type of regulation of this, at a minimum, some type of registration, I'd be all for that. And anything has to have some opportunity for enforcement or recourse for not just agencies, but for people too. Because right now, we're just left to our own devices. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Chairman Dollar, I think you have a question for Mr. Renner.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming all the way up here today to visit with us.
I needed a vacation.
Yeah. So, just by function of you being here, and you've obviously, I think, probably worked on this a good bit. Can you explain or share a little bit about your experience in trying to work with your local government, and what has that experience been like for you in dealing with this?
My experience is minimal. I really didn't start taking on this issue until really about the past 2 months, when residents in our little neighborhood, which is King City, which, if you've been to St. Simons, we're in the village, we're the neighborhood west of the pier, between the lodge on Sea Island and the pier. That's the old neighborhood of King City. And we've got 7 houses on the street. There's 11 people who live there. All of them have lived there all their lives except for me. And then we have 1 rental house. And it's just a disruption. It's really the East Beach folks that have dealt with this for over 3 years, because they had again, R6 zoned neighborhood, so stable single-family residential. They had one that advertises itself as a wedding venue, and they had parties and 200 guests and parking everywhere, and they complained, and the county refused to do anything about it until they were put in a position with the threat of a lawsuit from the East Beach Homeowners Association saying, are you going to be on the side of a lawsuit where you're having to say you're not enforcing your zoning, or where you're going to be on our side against the owners of the house, you know, to enforce your residential zoning. So that went all the way, lawsuits and cross suits went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court determined that level of rental is clearly not accessory use. And so now I have sympathy for those property owners. They're saying, okay, tell us what the rules are. The county has done absolutely nothing. Our commissioners, for some reason, are completely unresponsive to this issue.
And does the town not have any kind of authority to limit this or
no,
do
we're not.
anything with it?
We're not incorporated.
Oh, St. Simon's not incorporated.
We're Well, there's of course a movement now to incorporate, which I think is that's another issue.
Mm-hmm.
Giant mistake, but another issue. Because we don't feel that we're being served well by diverse representation through commissioners. We have one commissioner who represents the island.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Chairman Taylor.
I'll answer my question.
Great. Thank you for being here. We've had a good conversation in the past, I think, and you've got some information to me, and I appreciate that, and we'll share all
I'm
that.
glad y'all are working on this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Holly, you want to come up and talk to us all the way from Rome today?
Hi. My name is Holly McHagee, and I'm the president for the Georgia Innkeepers Association. I represent independent bed and breakfasts and inns all across Georgia. I also own the Claremont House Bed and Breakfast in Rome, Georgia, which is a 5-room bed and breakfast. It's a private house, Victorian house, that I have owned and lived in for 12 years. So there's quite a lot of fabulous conversation that's been happening here already. So I'm trying to think of what I can bring that's different than what a lot of other people that have already spoken have brought up. And part of it is just that personal experience of being an innkeeper in Georgia. And it's very frustrating for me to see these conversations about short-term rental and Airbnb, because I have a bed and breakfast and it is my home, but the Department of Health comes in and inspects it, and I pay for the privilege. The fire department comes in and inspects. I have a significant insurance burden that other people who have a historic house like mine do not have, because I am using it in a commercial capacity. So kind of with Savannah, I think they mentioned that they defined it as, you're getting compensation for overnight lodging. In my mind, if you're getting compensation for overnight lodging, you're a business, and that starts with a business license. You can't just open a gift shop in your house in a neighborhood and not get a business license and not have sales tax, because if you do that, at least if you did that in Rome, the city would come down on you. They would say, hey, you're not paying your sales tax. And so we pay sales tax and hotel tax and all that good stuff. And it just bothers me that there is this idea that because there's this new technology that makes it easy to put anything out in the marketplace, that somehow it's not a part of the marketplace. That's, for me, is a question of definition. The Georgia Department of Health defines tourist court accommodations, and they have 2 or more rooms listed right now. So if you are having 2 rooms in your house, you count as a tourist court accommodation, and you're supposed to be inspected by the Georgia Department of Health, which they say is done at the county level. So obviously, the state of Georgia is huge, and we have very diverse economic and population density. So with speaking with some Department of Health people, they've mentioned that sometimes there's like one office for several counties. So they have a hard time getting everywhere and inspecting everywhere. And if they don't see a significant risk, they don't really follow up on it. Whereas in Rome, where I am, I mean, my people are on it. If anybody's doing anything, they know and they are there. And ultimately, 12 years in, I think that's a good thing. When I first started, I might have been like, hey, is this really necessary? I just have 5 rooms. At the most, I'm going to have 20 people having breakfast, and that's the exception rather than the rule. So if I mess up, that's 20 people versus how many hundreds go through any of our restaurants in a given day. But, we have to have ServSafe certification. We've learned all of the fabulous things that we can do to people on accident if we're not diligent. And I think that's really important when we're talking about tourism and the economy of our state, because if one person comes to Georgia and has a terrible sickness, it kind of reflects on the whole state. And all of the tourists will look at it and go, I could also go to North Carolina. It's kind of similar. It's got mountains, it's got coast, and they're taking care of their tourists. So I don't think that. I think Georgia's very unique and fabulous. But, you know, we are looking at this in a competitive economic tourist state. We want to be sure that we're protecting our tourists. And that means making sure that they have adequate, fire prevention, that the fire departments are aware. You know, we have 3 different shifts at the firehouse just down the road from me. At any given time, they might come by and say, hey, we'd like to do a familiarization tour. And we are so happy to see them and happy to show them around, because heaven forbid anything happens, I want them to know exactly where my guest rooms are, where the guests will be, how many there might be, so that they can take care of them. And I wish I could say that it never happens, but it did happen in my community. And they had 12 people in that house, and almost all of them got out. One didn't, but they were prepared. They had sprinkler systems, they had a system in place, they had fire extinguishers, and it just breaks my heart to think of what could happen in some of our historic communities where all these houses are right together, and if the fire department is just not prepared, that can lead to disaster.
Chairman Dollar.
So thank you for coming today, by the way. So really, in your mind, there's no delineation between the situation that the gentleman from St. Simons was talking about, where this is the primary, I guess, use of the properties. It's just turning out people, and a situation where Representative Fry is looking at, where many of his constituents are renting their place out for literally 6 weekends a year. For you, it's pretty much all the same.
No, I went to the University of Georgia in Athens. I have family from Augusta. I absolutely understand that there are certain circumstances, like the Masters is a huge asset to the state of Georgia. It wasn't when it first started, but it grew and it grew and it grew. And it wouldn't make sense to suddenly just build a bunch of hotels to deal with that influx of population for that one time of year. At the University of Georgia, they have 6 home games. That's 6 times. I think there is definitely a line there between people who are just trying to help their community realize an opportunity and put their best foot forward. When we had the Olympics in 1996, we did a lot as a state. We banded together and we made sure that we could welcome all of those international guests to Georgia. So there is a line between people who are trying to fill a very reasonable need and people who are opening a business. Does that answer your question, or part of it? I mean, I just think there is that. There's clearly people who are buying houses. I mean, my husband and I have been watching Airbnb for years. Many innkeepers over the whole United States have talked about it. Some have embraced it and used it as an additional marketing arm. I personally haven't, because I'm very frustrated by what they have done to our industry. In 2008, with the recession, a number of independent bed and breakfasts and inns in Georgia closed because they were underwater with their mortgage. Since that time, we have not recouped, we haven't regained those numbers. And I do feel that part of it is that people realize they can circumvent all of these regulations by just using the online marketplace. So Atlanta, for instance, with Atlanta proper only has 6 bed and breakfasts. That's crazy to me. Asheville has hundreds. I mean, it's just one city. New York, unfortunately, when they made their regulations, they made their legal bed and breakfasts illegal. So there were about 30 traditional bed and breakfasts that had been operating in New York before they made their short-term rental ordinance. And with a little bit of phrasing, they made it illegal for those people. So there are innkeepers that had been in it for 27 years, and overnight, their operation became illegal, even though they had paid all of their appropriate taxes and licenses, and they were inspected, but it was just the wording of the legislation. So legislation is difficult, and there is definitely, it's important to be reasonable and pay attention and make sure that we are considering all of the different implications of what eventually happens. But the biggest thing we've seen here in Georgia is the difference in implementation of local ordinances, like the Department of Health. Some bed and breakfasts have to ask to be inspected because their department just doesn't really think they need to. One of our members had to ask for a business license repeatedly when they were told, oh, no, you really don't need one. And they were like, no, really, here is the ordinance. We do need one. And there's local alcohol rules about how you have to get a state license, and then you have to get your local license. But some of these non-traditional short-term rentals will include breakfast, and they will include alcohol. So there's many layers of regulation that they're violating on different levels, on the local level, on the state level. And the biggest thing is also zoning. In Marietta, one of our members has a beautiful historic house not too far from Marietta Square, and she said the 3 houses on either side of her are renting rooms overnight through Airbnb. And she has tried for years to get her commissioners and city manager to actually enforce the codes that she has to abide by, and they won't do it. And the problem for her is, she's trying to compete because the consumer side, they honestly, it's surprising, they don't always realize that someone who's on Airbnb is not doing all the things that a traditional bed and breakfast is doing. And so they don't realize that part of that price difference is the people that have to include all of the costs of doing business versus someone who doesn't have to include the cost of doing business. On a success side, Raven County, up in the far northeast corner of the state, some of our members, David and Gail Daru, who have the Beechwood Inn, they petitioned their city commission for 5 years to regulate some of these short-term rentals. And they talked about, they would do numbers, they would go and say, hey, these are the hotel sales tax revenue that we're missing out on, this is the business that we're not doing, these are the health concerns that are not being investigated. And it took a change in the elected officials before someone took it seriously. And then they hired someone to go and follow up on it and to enforce these codes that were already in existence. So for that, they speculated that part of it was that some of the people it was the status quo. It was just what had been done. And even though there were codes and people were violating the codes, they didn't want to risk upsetting their friends and family because it was a small community. So we do understand there's a lot going on, but we are risking losing traditional bed and breakfasts and inns because many of my members have said to me, especially with the new $5 fee, they were like, okay, the state's going to regulate us more. Why should we remain official bed and breakfasts and not just go out of business and then rent our rooms online like our neighbors are doing? And for me, it's not really an option because I'm on a really popular street, really obvious. I mean, I guess I could take the sign out of my yard, but I would feel kind of dirty doing that, honestly. I mean, I chose to buy this house with the intention to do this for the rest of my life and hopefully pass it on to my daughter. And, if she decides to sell it, that's on her. But I really, I've made a lifetime commitment to the bed and breakfast industry and tourism in Georgia. I mean, this is my life. And it's just heartbreaking that it's coming out like this. But part of why we don't talk about it is because we do try to be quite neutral. We try to be good open spaces where we are welcoming to all of our guests. And I don't want to eliminate the short-term rental market by any means. I think it's important that our visitors to Georgia have choices between hotels, traditional bed and breakfasts, or vacation rentals. But I do think it needs to be a fair and equal marketplace.
That's one of the things that we're going to try to do. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And please ask me any questions later if you need any help along the road.
Thank you. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. John Barber with the Georgia Association of Realtors. Here today representing the 30,000 realtors from across the state of Georgia, and also here to speak on behalf of property owners across the state of Georgia. One of the core tenets of the Georgia Association of Realtors is the protection of private property rights and free enterprise. And I sort of see that, both of those things at the crux of this issue. We've got citizens across Georgia exercising their rights as property owners, and also entering into this new shared economy in the free market. And my mission today is I want to speak on behalf of those property owners and encourage the committee to keep property rights at the forefront of the conversation. Make no mistake about it. As we regulate short-term rentals, essentially we are regulating those private property owners. It's a little bit different than the Uber discussion, as was mentioned earlier. We're not essentially regulating that automobile in Uber. We're actually regulating the property and the property owner's ability to utilize that property in the way they see fit. Now, with property rights comes property responsibilities, and we are the first to acknowledge that. And I think we've heard from a property owner from St. Simons, and those are legitimate concerns. We don't have an interest in having sort of a blanket policy where those communities have no voice. But I think one of the things that we've heard today is the uniqueness of the communities across Georgia. I'm not sure that a one-size-fits-all state model is the way to go. I think if you look at St. Simons, the coast of Georgia, Athens, Augusta for the Masters, and the mountains, you've got very unique circumstances of why people are seeking, and consumers are seeking, to rent on a short-term basis. The rest of Georgia, I'm not sure how much this issue is impacting those communities. So when we think about a sort of a blanket policy, and we've already talked about trying to exclude certain properties, whether that be the Masters or UGA games, and sort of setting a de minimis level, I'm not sure that we can capture a unified vision of what needs to happen with this issue. I think the local government level is perhaps where this needs to be examined, because they themselves can look at the unique circumstances within their own community and decide for themselves whether they would like to seek those regulations, as Savannah has done. My understanding is that Savannah is the only local ordinance on the books. As they indicated before, that they had to look outside of the state for examples. We've looked at other examples from across the country. I'm not aware of a state that has done a blanket policy. So that, again, I would just urge caution there as we examine this issue. And as I mentioned, there are many different ways that property owners utilize their property to exercise their property rights. The federal government, from an IRS standpoint, has actually delineated between what a business activity is and what is not when you're renting a portion of your property. And essentially, the way they make that delineation is if you're providing additional services. If you are the property owner and you're changing the linens, or you're providing breakfast or other elements, that's when the IRS then triggers to say you're now operating a business. So I would ask you guys to also look at some of the federal tax codes that are on the books that have contemplated property owners' ability to utilize their property and whether that is a taxable event or not. So again, I'm John Barber with the Georgia Association of Realtors. I look forward to participating in this dialogue on behalf of property owners across Georgia as we go forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody? Most certainly appreciate. Oh, sorry, Chairman Dollar.
Sorry, we're up here kind of talking amongst ourselves. So the realtor's position is that this really needs to be addressed at the local level.
I wouldn't say that's a firm position. I would say that we're urging caution from a state level perspective, as we don't know that a one-size-fits-all model is going to achieve what we're seeking to achieve, and is trying to sort of delineate those that are seeking to operate as a business versus those property owners who are just simply exercising their rights as property owners to rent a portion of their space. So we don't have a hard and fast position at this point. It's probably premature for me to answer that. But I would say that the local governments have a better feel for the pulse of what's going on in their own community. Savannah, for example, separating out neighborhoods through zoning of where it's permissible or not, that's just not something at the state level that we could really comprehend and do on a blanket basis.
And this may be premature for you to answer, but do the locals such as Savannah or Athens or anybody else, do they currently have the means to properly facilitate this, or does the state need to take any action or to empower them or anything like that?
Well, that's a great question. I think they're already empowered to do it if they seek to pass a local ordinance, which Savannah has done. and that's a question that I've had going through my mind today. We've got the instance of St. Simons or Rayburn County where the locals may not have been reactive enough to some of their constituents. And I'm not sure what the state could do from an enforcement standpoint of how we're going to empower state bureaucrats to monitor every single property across the state of Georgia and then have the resources to be in the local communities to enforce it. So I think the locals are probably better suited to enforcement to begin with.
I appreciate those comments, and for those of you guys that are in the audience, we have reached out to the ACCG and Georgia Municipal Association and plan on having them speak at the next meeting to address the local aspect. Anything else?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stanley, you have waived, is that correct, or are you?
Only to say, Hayden Stanley on behalf of the Georgia Apartment Association. We have a unique place in this economy, and in the future we'd like to speak to
That'd be great, and I think if you'll get with Brian, he'll make arrangements for that. Members of the committee, anything else? I think we're off to a good start. I appreciate the comments that were here today. I think we had a good cross-representation, and there will be a second meeting. We haven't scheduled it yet, but it will be duly posted, and you guys will be notified. And once again, let me remind you that, like Mr. Stanley, if you want to have a position at the next meeting, please get with Brian, and he'll handle that. On a personal note, for those of you who may be interested, across the way in the Capitol at 11 o'clock, the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War celebration remembrance is going on, and today they're honoring Georgia POWs, one of which who was in my district and was held POW for 7 years, and his wife and daughter are speaking, so I encourage you to walk across the way and to see that if you can. No other business, we're going to go ahead and adjourn it. Thank you.